My last question before I open it up to our friends here is what your top 3 tips would be for anyone who wants to establish and build a long-standing author career. So not just one book, like everybody's focused on getting the one book published or getting that first book over the line or the next book or wherever they might be. But if you're looking at longevity in an author career, what would your top 3 tips for that be?
I think, first of all, to sort out why you might want that, like who you are really, like what do you want to be as a writer? Do you want to be a storyteller? Do you want to communicate stories to other people, or do you just want to make money? And that's fine too, like that's totally valid. Or could be about ego. I think it's really important to know what your motivation is though, because that's going to be your motivation throughout pretty much, or it's going to be part of your bigger motivation. And you need to know that it's enough to sustain you when the going gets rough, because it will. Sitting down to write anything, you're going to have many moments of doubt, and there are going to be plenty of times when you just think, I don't want to do this. But if what you want is a long-term career, you're going to have to show up and stick with it. So whatever your motivation is, it does have to be enough to sustain you. And certainly subsidiary motivations can come into it, but I think the through line probably stays the same. So that's motivation. That's reason. Tip number 1. Tip number 2, I think, is to keep reading, because if you're in a particular pattern, if you are someone who's producing regularly, that can be really tempting to think, I just want to focus on this. But never lose sight of the fact that you probably want to be a writer because you love being a reader first. And so keep reading just for your own entertainment and for helping the field lie fallow, actually. So reading someone else's stories can be a really good way of giving your brain a rest from what you're working on. And tip number 3, I think, is to sort out your nature to help you develop habits, because those habits, particularly if you're living in a city, if you have a household to run, children to look after, there are many, many things that are going to get in the way, not just of time, but rhythm for what you're doing. So I always think, I write in very short spurts. I write on public transport most of the time. When it was the pandemic, I had to write at home. I had to come up with a different rhythm, but I found that structure and stuck to it. Because there were other things going on in the pandemic, as everyone knows. But I think trying to find a way that works for you, be flexible enough to change it if you can, but also just know yourself enough to know that other people's tips, like the ones I'm giving now, are great. But it's really great if you can, what's even better is if you can find out your own nature and find out what works for you. And also don't get hung up on the idea that you need to have endless amounts of time and a special location and special candles and all that kind of stuff in order to write. Jackie Collins, in a documentary I saw recently about her, when she started writing, she was, bearing in mind this was the days where there were no computers, nothing. She used to write at traffic lights, driving her children to school. So, that's a couple of minutes maximum. And she was no doubt handwriting. So you can get a lot done, if you have a few sentences, hits and spurts. But I think be able to, and I'm continuing on the line here, I've probably moved away from the 3 things. But if your story is always with you, then that is possible. You just dive in.